Welcome. Thank you for attending the April 28th, 2025 meeting of the Westerville Schools Board of Education. This evening's agenda will be displayed on the screens in the front of the room. Printed agendas are available in the back, or you may find the agenda on your mobile device by connecting to the district's website at www.wcsoh.org. Click on our district link, select Board of Education, and follow the board docs link to our current meeting agenda. There will be an opportunity for public comment this evening. There's a sign-up sheet located on the table in the back of the room. Each speaker will have 3 minutes to address the board, and a timer will be shown on the screen. And this portion of the meeting will be limited to no more than 60 minutes. And with that, Ms. Marshall, will you please take the call?
Mrs. Altman?
Here.
Mr. Heckelman?
Here.
Mrs. Valentine?
Here.
Mrs. Meyer?
Here.
Mrs. Lebian will be late.
Yes, she's on her way, stuck in traffic, so apologies. All right. Will you join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. May I have a motion to allow public comment since this is a special meeting?
Second. So moved.
Will you take the vote?
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Sorry. Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mr. Heckelman?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes, and I'm going to welcome back Miss Tara Stockdale. And just a reminder, you have 3 minutes. Please, the board does not discriminate based on the identity or viewpoint of the speaker during our public participation. However, the board president may limit comments that are obscene, abusive, or harassing in an attempt to protect the privacy interests of our students. We just ask that the speakers not identify students by name during their comments, and persons having public complaints about district personnel, programming, or operations will be referred to the process set forth in Board Policy 9130. And finally, the board reminds speakers their statements should be directed to the board as a whole and not to individual members. Welcome. You have 3. Yeah, and Mr. Reeves will do time. Thank you. So when your 3 minutes has elapsed.
Thank you, Superintendent Hamburg, President Myers, respected members of the board, and also thank you for allowing me to speak at a special meeting because I was just looking at the agenda, public comments. I'm really here just to, again, thank you for your service. We all know that this is a very critical time for public education. And I wanted to just express that I feel having the support of families that want to be involved and believe in our schools and in our district is very important. And my family is one of those families. And I just hope that the district and the board, understand that our family does support this district and education, and that we are hoping, to just feel like our concerns are heard. So, thank you.
Thank you. Seeing we have no other public comments, may I have a motion to suspend Robert's Rules of Order?
So moved.
Second.
Will you take the vote, Ms. Marshall?
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mr. Heckelman?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes. And now I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Marshall to talk to us about our district finances.
Yes, thank you, President Meyer and members of the board. So we are just going to have an open conversation. I'm going to invite, who we have, Carrie and Scott coming up here.
Yeah, I was just going to say, ask Carrie and Scott to set up here, but we also have other members of the team that we may tap in as questions come up as
Sitting
well.
all the way in the back there. Yeah. Except for Ann, thanks for sitting in the second row. We appreciate it. So really, I just want this to be a conversation. I did put a presentation together because I thought it would be helpful as we're kind of going through, so that when we go back and watch this later on the video, we can see the slides and all of those things. Plus, I'm sure we will share some tidbits out into the world as we're having conversations. And then, just make a note real quick. All right, so I like to remind people, so they don't forget, that the cost of education in Ohio is a shared responsibility between the state and the local community. And what we're talking about today is how the state's viewing that responsibility, really. So when we talk about the budget process, I know you all have seen this before. We have the governor's budget, we have the House's budget, and now here's where we are with the Senate. The Senate Education Finance Committee is starting their hearings tomorrow with invited party testimony, tomorrow and Wednesday, I believe. And then I think May the 7th and May the 14th, they will have open testimony on the budget. At least that's the rumor currently. And that's always tentative and could change. They did already have the meeting notices sent out for today and tomorrow and Wednesday, excuse me. When we talk about the governor's proposal, updating those local wealth calculations, so our state share was 43% in fiscal year 2021. It's currently 23%. The governor's proposal would drop it down to 11% by the end of the biennium. And the governor's proposal is also still using those 2022 cost inputs. So what was the cost to educate a child in a general education classroom in 2022? That's what we're being funded for today. That's what we were being funded for in fiscal year 24. And that's what the governor's proposal would continue to fund us moving forward if that were approved as it was. The governor's proposal also included lots and lots of new requirements for traditional public schools to which we would be subject. Now, the House's proposal, our main concern, well, I say main, we have several concerns, but one of our biggest concerns is is affectionately known as the clawback. And so this would require a county budget commission to claw back a general fund balance for anything over 30% of the preceding year's expenses. So we prepare a tax budget every year, and we have it submitted to the County Budget Commission by January the 15th. Franklin County currently waives the tax budget hearing requirement and all of that, so we do what's called an alternative tax budget, where we submit that to the county. The Budget Commission holds a hearing, and then they send us back our amounts and our rates. Through this process, the County Budget Commission would be required to meet in August, so after our June 30 fiscal year end, review our cash balances, and then set rates accordingly, beginning for tax year 2025. For us, this would mean over $110 million, $110.5 million, within the next what's really the next tax year. I should update that, because it would be spread over 2 fiscal years, and we'll talk more about that. So the House's net proposal, it added $20 per pupil in fiscal year 26, scrapped the Fair School funding formula, and then basically just gave every district $20 more per pupil in FY26, and then $30 more per pupil in FY27. That's where that $687,000 goes from. So that's total new revenue over that 2-year period.
Which I think it's important to note that the reason the previous funding was shown to be unconstitutional is because it was that residual funding. So
Yes.
how much money do we want to spend on education? Let's divide that by the number of kids, which is exactly what they're proposing to do. Whereas the fair funding formula was actually based on the cost to educate and was more
Right.
in line with what the expectations were from the court.
Yeah, so it would appear that we would be headed back towards that residual budgeting piece. So the DeRolf decision that was ruled unconstitutional in 97, and then 3 more times after that, before the Supreme Court eventually told the state to stop bringing it back because it's not constitutional, was due to the over-reliance of local property taxes and residual budgeting. And so that's what we're dealing with currently. So the other thing that the House's proposed budget, and I have a whole slide on this, is we could potentially lose about $10 million, a little over $10 million in rollback for homeowners, owner occupancy credit and rollback for residential property and homeowners. So we'll talk more about that. And then that clawback. So not really in addition to Westerville schools. And this is not just our school district. This is pretty much every school district in the state would
Nicole-
see it. Oh, sorry.
Nicole, I have a question really quick. Can you talk about in the Fair School Funding Plan? I think we are familiar with it, but just in case anybody is watching, you mentioned that it's based on the cost to actually educate a child. What does that mean?
Yeah, so the Fair School Funding Plan takes into account all different areas, from administration to teachers. It has ratios based on the number of students. It also has categorical add-ons for special education, gifted, career tech, economically disadvantaged, all of those things. And it works into that formula. And then once we have that amount by student, we say, okay, what is that local community's responsibility and what is the state's responsibility of that total cost? And to look at that, the state looks at what is our local property wealth for our boundaries, our footprint in our district, and then what is our resident income? So anybody that lives within the Westerville school system, they look at the federal census for, not the census, but the federal income taxes, and the adjusted gross income for that. So they continue to update those numbers, that local wealth factor, the property wealth, and the income data, but they continue to keep what does it cost at those 2022 amounts. So those numbers continue to be outdated.
So essentially, if you've got a student who has additional needs, maybe they are, they have a disability or they're English language learners, costs a little bit more to educate those children, so that's factored into the formula. This new, I don't know if you can call it a formula, this new funding model will just be everybody, no matter what, $20
Yes.
extra. Okay.
Yes, they would not take into account any of the additionals.
Okay, thanks.
Do we have any sense of what the price, or what the price, not the right word, what the differential is between that plus 687K and what it would have been under Fair School Funding Formula?
So it's about $5 million under the Fair School funding.
So we would have received
formula,
5 million versus, give or take.
if they
depending, yeah,
actually fully
if they
fund it.
fully funded it versus the
And that's not,
687.
and that's just based on what they have now for the categorical add-ons. The state's also done studies on all of those areas. You know, it's not in this presentation, but in our community presentation, we shared about, we're really focusing on special education and the cost of special education, how that's grown. There was a study completed in 2022, and we're well below where we should be based on 2022, what that study said in 2022. And the state hasn't updated anything even with that study. So, but even those numbers are outdated now because that was in 2022. So, yeah. So we failed a levy in November. Everyone here is aware of that. And after that time, we went back to our buildings and departments and we asked them to take a look at their current year budgets, see where they could make some reductions moving forward. The last year of our forecast is the fiscal year 2029. And so this is what our forecast looks like through 29 with the updated projections in March 17th. So looking at what folks could reduce in the current year, that was about $4.8 million. And then also looking forward, so we have like technology, curriculum, that's a lot of those updates have been delayed in the 5-year forecast period to help capture some savings in the short term. And then we have over 30 positions that we've reduced going into the next school year. And I want to just be mindful of, you know, we didn't have 33 people sitting around doing nothing. Reducing 33 positions in this district means that there are a lot of other folks that are picking up a lot more because we had to make reductions because of that levy failure. And I also want to point out that not only did we fail a levy, but we saw a $4 million reduction in our state funding this year because of those cost inputs staying the same, but our state share continuing to be calculated and dropping. And so, you know, on the funding formula, we gained over 100 students in the calculation in fiscal year 25, and we lost $4 million in funding. And we've shared that with our legislators. That's a huge swing. to any school district. And, you know, as we talk about the need for having adequate reserves and cash balances to help weather some of those very significant peaks and valleys that we deal with in state funding and other things that the state does, it's important that we are able to plan and capture for that. So this was the updated forecast that the board approved in March through 29, and then I added 2030 because as soon as June 30th rolls around, we're gonna have 2030. I just wanna make sure everybody has a good picture of what that looks like. So the green bar is our revenues, and the red bar, or not red bar, the red lines. The red line is is our expenses, the green line is our revenues, and then the blue bar represents our unreserved fund balance. And that's the line that we use to certify any long-term contracts or anything like that we have, any appropriations measures, all of that. The green line looks like it's ticked up in 25 and drops down in 26. That's because as part of the November levy, we also had that bond issue. The board had set aside $30 million in the general fund balance to a capital projects fund to combine with the bond issue, so it would be a no new millage ask of our community. When that ballot issue failed, we rescinded that capital projects fund and we moved that 30 million back into the general fund. It appears as a revenue on the projections, but it's not, it's just moving the fund balance. It's not actually revenue. Does that make sense? So this is what we would look like with the House's proposed clawback. So as I mentioned, the clawback would be for tax year 25. So we would see half of that clawback in 26 and the rest of it in 27. And what they're looking at is that red line, and they're saying that this blue bar graph here cannot exceed that 30%. And Scott Reeves gave me this great idea to put this dotted line right here about what does 30% represent. So that's that line right there. And so what the House's proposal says is that we cannot exceed that. So that would make a significant gap, obviously, for our revenues and expenses. And you can see that we would be nearly in a negative unreserved situation by fiscal year 27 and well into a negative, these are balances. This is not revenues and expenses. This is cash that hasn't been obligated for something else overall. So this is significant, and just a note there that that's where the 110 million spread over the 2 years comes from. So I think what the thought is that the tax rates would be reduced for that tax year 25, and then the county would come back and like jack tax rates back up in tax year 26 if our balance fell below that 30%, if our balance fell below that 30% mark. But if our balance falls far below that, there's nothing to bring those tax rates up a little bit more, if that makes any sense. There's no guarantee that we would remain at that 30% balance. It's just taking it away and not bringing it back. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? So I want
Add one thing, I think it's important to note, and Nicole has those two slides side by side, which is really nice to see the comparison of how we were using our cash to sustain us across the life of the forecast. Obviously, with this change, we ran out quickly. Important to note, one of the things the House included was to reduce from a 5-year forecast to a 3-year forecast. That does not change what's happening for most districts in the state in years 4 and 5. Just by not requiring it to be on a piece of paper. So I just want to point that out because I feel like that's a little bit of their answer.
the last year of our forecast would be fiscal year 27 if
But
that were in
technically, we
place.
still have a little bit of cash there.
Right.
But you can see it drastically drops off, and so they're wanting to just get rid of the rest of the forecast is their answer.
Thanks for pointing that out. Excuse me. So when we talk about clawback consequences specifically for Westerville City Schools, this would require the district to go back to the voters every year with new operating levies. So this is my conspiracy theory. As we, in 2013, so prior to 2013, prior to November of 2013, all levies, all voted levies, the state picked up 12.5% for homeowners. There was a 10% rollback for residential and agricultural properties. And then there was a 2.5% additional for owner occupancy. So if you lived in your home, you got 12.5%. That came right off of every tax levy that the school has. And so the state, the homeowner wouldn't pay that, but the state would reimburse the schools for that loss. And that was a way, I think, to help equalize what the state was paying versus what the local property owners are paying. The state eliminated that on all new levies passed after starting November of 2013. It was anything after September of 2013. So beginning November 2013, every single levy got 12.5% more expensive for homeowners, but schools didn't receive any more funding from those levies. Does that make sense? So my thought is, if you're eliminating our cash balance and you're dropping those tax rates and you're forcing all the schools to go out and get new levies every other year, that is the state essentially reducing our reimbursement by nearly $10 million, over $10 million, because we would have to have new levies year over year that would not have those rollback percentages applied to them anymore. Does that make sense? Am I being too much of a conspiracy theorist here to say this? But that's what I think is some of this. Because the state continues to talk about the reimbursements. We're reimbursed for the homestead exemption and for the rollback exemption. The state continues to reimburse us for those old levies, and they don't reimburse us for anything new. So every time the budget cycle comes up, they talk about how much money they're reimbursing the schools through the homestead exemption and the rollback. And so I think this is another way that they can try to eliminate that reimbursement for schools. Again, putting more money onto the homeowners, more costs onto the homeowners. So we've talked about this. Overall, the consequences, we would be in fiscal watch and require state oversight. It would eliminate our ability to meet long-term obligations and state-required certifications. There's no shortage of those. It would require substantial cuts in programs and services for all students, likely down to the state and federal minimum requirements. I get asked a lot, like, what does this mean? This means closing buildings. This means increasing class sizes substantially. This means eliminating extracurricular programs. This means not transporting high school students, only transporting students if they live 2 miles or more away. Those are the state. What are you doing? Am I too loud?
No, you're squealing.
Am I? Sorry. Sorry. Technical. I was gonna say. But those are the kinds of things that we talk about when we say state minimums programming and what that would look like. Okay. Is that better?
I think so.
Pause for a moment. Technical difficulties. We are working on putting together like all the things that we do that aren't requirements, essentially. There's lots of stuff that the schools do that we're not technically required. Art, music, PE, that's not a requirement. There's lots of different things.
Nicole.
Is there a PE requirement for high school? For high school, not elementary though, right?
Yeah, basically K-8, you just have to offer it, and it can be offered by classroom teachers, but we do have graduation requirements, but once we have enough courses to hit the graduation requirements, we well exceed that with offerings for our kids.
Sure.
Before you,
Yeah.
oh, sorry, go ahead and then I'll ask my question.
Sure. It would also jeopardize the district's ability to meet payroll obligations throughout the fiscal year. So we only receive tax settlements twice a year. So in August and March, the majority of our funding comes from our local property taxes. And so the district had a period of time back in 2011 where it had to move a payroll from June to July to cross fiscal years due to cash flow issues. But we do have concerns about if that 30%, if that's the balance that we're keeping, then I think we would have trouble. I'd say by like January or February, we would be struggling to meet payroll obligations. We spend over $5.6 million just in salaries on one payroll. So it's just a significant concern that we would have. And it would also reduce the district's and all Ohio public entities' bond ratings with Moody's and Standard & Poor's, and I do have a slide on this as well. The other thing is our, oh, I'm sorry.
No, just before you move on. So we here require state oversight, but could you talk a little bit about what that means for the people so we can fully understand what that would look like in terms of state oversight?
So that would require the district to come up with a plan to address whatever it is that put us in fiscal watch. And it would require the state to oversee that plan, whether it's acceptable, not acceptable. It would require the state to work with the district to help make decisions. Fiscal emergency is where you have a state-approved commission that actually overrides the vote of the board. So it would be a state-appointed commission. That's for fiscal emergency. We would be in fiscal emergency the very next year if we didn't have something to take care of the deficits in the fiscal watch year, if that makes any sense.
Who at the state is the overseeing body? Is it due?
The local government services with the state auditor's office.
Okay, so within the state auditor's
Fiscal watch,
office.
so with fiscal watch, you work with due and the state auditor's office.
Okay,
But
but in
fiscal
emergency.
caution, I think fiscal caution is mostly due, but fiscal watch is
Okay,
the state and auditors, and then fiscal emergency is the state auditor plus the state-appointed commission.
okay.
So, and I shared with committee, I worked with the auditor's office from 2005 to 2012 with local government services, and that was part of my job, was overseeing fiscal watch and emergency projects
Mhm.
during the Great Recession of 2008 to 2011. Does everybody remember that? There were lots of school districts that were in fiscal emergency. If you go back, just Google Little Miami schools, they went years without being able to pass a levy. It was a very significant thing. London City Schools was in fiscal emergency. But there was, like, school districts were criticized for not having adequate reserves to weather economic downtimes during the Great Recession. And so it's just odd that we are here.
And I'm just curious, how many school districts would this proposed budget put into?
It would impact over 80% of the schools in Ohio.
Being overseen by the
But I mean,
state?
just with the clawback provision, but I think overall it would affect all of us
Yeah.
negatively, especially when you look at the auditor's office and some of the financial health indicators that they're doing, and also the bond ratings. Because while not every school district goes out for new operating levies, depending on what their situation is, most all schools have bonds outstanding in some way, shape, or form. So
Can the auditor's office handle a workload like that?
I don't know. So I will tell you this next thing that we're talking about here. I sat on a webinar on Thursday, and poor Bob Hinkle, who is the chief deputy auditor for the Auditor State's Office, he's retiring this year. Good for him. But he was asked several times over, like, hey, did any of the legislators talk to the Auditor Faber about, like, this clawback and you know, what this is going to mean for school districts? Because at the same time, the state is rolling out this financial health indicators for school districts. So this already applies to local governments. And there's like 16 different indicators that, and the report's actually linked here if you want to look at it, but it, you know, looks at various different things to determine whether a school district is financially healthy overall. And one thing that they do look at is changes in fund balance, and they have a whole indicator on it. And it talks about the larger the reserve, the better the entity is able to absorb in the short term the impact of sudden revenue loss or significant increases in operating costs and begin planning financial adjustments. And then the cautionary outlook includes a less than 6 months of current year revenues for a fund balance. So they're just not talking to each other. And the auditor's office shared that they did not know that that was something that was going to be proposed, and that they are not, should that become law, then they would revisit this guidance for school districts.
Ms. Marshall, so, I've tried to do this before, but I want to try to put this in layman's terms, and you can correct me, right? When my analogy breaks down, which they always do. So I'm going to say, just going to make up an easy number. Say a household has $50,000 a year income, right? And they know they're budgeting, they're planning for 5 years. They know their income's going to be basically flat. There'll be some modest increases, right, like we have on the inside mills or on additional construction, but basically, it's essentially flat. And I won't go into all the reasons why, but House Bill 920 and all that.
Right.
So you plan out for 5 years. Your expenses are going to go up because inflation, right? Things are not getting cheaper, they're getting more expensive. So at the beginning, you're like, okay, well, I made $50,000 a year. I'm only going to spend 40. I'm going to put the rest in the bank, right? Because I've projected this out, and I know by year 5, I'm going to need all of that accumulated savings because I'll be essentially deficit spending, right, at that point. This feels a little like your employer coming in and saying, well, hey, I see that you have, more money than you need in your bank account, right? You've saved more than 30% of what you spent last year, so I'm just gonna not pay you that much, right? You clearly are doing fine. You don't need this money. Again, I'm gonna reduce what I pay you. That's essentially, and again, explain where this breaks down, but it's essentially like the clawback is, we have planned and we have put money in reserve, which is like savings, and it's money that, was allocated to our district. We're being plannerly with it, and they're essentially saying, we're gonna take that back because clearly you don't need it.
Yeah, so it's definitely a misnomer that districts don't need it.
Right.
I think that, we have 609 traditional public schools. I'm sure there are 609 different reasons why school districts have cash balances that they have today, and how they intend to use them in the future.
Sure.
For us, we think about the loss of tangible personal property taxes years ago. That was in the early 2010, 2013 timeframe. 2011, I think, is when they did that. So the state eliminated tangible personal property for businesses, and it eliminated that tax, which was a revenue source for school districts. And then the state said, well, when we eliminate it, we're going to make the districts whole. We'll make the school districts whole, and we'll continue to reimburse districts for that lost revenue. Well, they did that for a period of time, and then they phased it out. Then we had the state, so used to the vouchers for charter schools and private schools used to run through traditional schools. So the state would fund us on average about $3,000 per pupil, but then they would send from our funding the full amount, the $6,000 or the $8,000 or whatever it was, and that came straight out of our local resources. That was not state funding that was going to them. Since the introduction of the Fair School Funding Plan, the state's now funding those directly, and it's just reducing the allocation to traditional schools overall, but it's funding them directly, so that's not a pass-through anymore. We also had the ESSER funds. Everybody remembers COVID, I'm sure. So we saw 3 rounds of COVID dollars, essentially, that needed to be spent within a finite period of time over a 3-year period, essentially, from 2020 to 23 and then 24, like it was staggered when it needed to be spent, the 3 different rounds. Our district, instead of adding a lot of new staff and programs, because we knew this was one-time funding, that was over $32 million that our district received to help with COVID and all of those things. We took expenses that are normally paid out of our general operating fund, and we moved them into our ESSER funds. Because it's a federal fund, it's not included in the operating fund. It's accounted for completely separate. It's not in the forecast. We moved those expenses into that fund until those dollars were used up, and now all of those expenses are coming back to our general operating fund. And so if you look at our forecast, it looks like our expenses are growing at an enormous rate. Well, it's not our expenses are growing at an enormous rate, it's because all of those expenses are coming back to the general fund from the federal fund. Governor DeWine's, I think his first year as governor, I really need to look this up because I say this a lot. I think it was 2019. Instead of giving districts growth for inflationary needs for the school funding formula, this was 2019, so we didn't have a funding formula. We were on the bridge formula. There was no formula that existed. And I have a whole presentation on this if anybody's interested. But he introduced student wellness and success funds, wraparound dollars to support the whole child, that we could spend on pretty much anything to support a child except for academics and regular education, right? Nurses, safety and security, mental health, all of those things. So that also wasn't included in the general fund. That was accounted for in a separate restricted special fund, and that wasn't included in the 5-year forecast. Again, because we knew that that was only a 2-year funding source, we weren't adding a lot of programs with that. We did support building some of our mental health programs through work sessions with the board and all of those things based on the needs that we had coming from our students. But guess what? That funding was gone in the next budget cycle. So all of those things came back to the general fund again. And so we continue, every 2 years, the state does a budget. And every 2 years, we never know what we're gonna get. Like, it fluctuates significantly every 2 years. And so to think that schools are gonna be able to plan without, and especially in the year of, I mean, I've had legislators ask me, well, if it's not 30%, what percentage should it be? And, you know, and I share with them, like, it really depends on the district because we all have unique needs. Not every school district has a permanent improvement levy. Not every school district is subject to House Bill 920. Not every school district, some school districts have income taxes, we do not. Like, different needs, different demographics, like all of the things, right? There's pipeline districts, all of the things. So I can't answer that question, but what I know is that there is no school district, I mean, when we talk about looking at our balance at June 30th and then coming back in August to determine what resources we'll have available, when we've already hired staff, kids have already scheduled classes, like you can't pivot at the beginning of a school year. Like, those things are, it's already done. You know what I mean? Like, that's just not an option for schools. And I think it's really irresponsible if anyone expects schools to plan that way.
Yeah, thanks for walking through that. I mean, again, you know, my analogy is oversimplified, but some people don't understand when we talk about clawback is that, you know, this is money that we planned with. It's money that we have in reserve for reasons, right? Different districts might have different reasons. To use the household analogy, different households might have different reasons for saving money, but that's, you know, it's the case that we look out and we have reserves for reasons. Sometimes there are reasons we know, like there's gonna be an inflationary increase, and sometimes it's because every 2 years, right, things change so wildly. So we're trying
Right.
to kind of level it out a little bit. But in no case is this, you know, yippee, we're sitting on a whole bunch of money.
Right. I
Right.
mean, we have some significant needs in this
Yeah.
district. We've shared with legislators. We have hundreds of millions of dollars in facilities needs. I think Carrie has some stuff that she can share with us on that. We have technology needs
Yep.
for our district. The state has yet to fund us for facilities. We're sitting on $25 million in credits that we've yet to be funded for because our turn's not up yet at the state. Were you gonna
Keeps
say
getting
something?
pushed back.
It keeps getting pushed back. Were you gonna say something?
I was just gonna say curricular needs that we've deferred, because again, and this is what we tried to talk about when we testified to the committees down at the State House, we could spend that money many different ways, but we need it to pay the bills because we've seen a reduction in our revenues.
So they're terming this tax relief for the property, for the local property owner, right? But essentially, I mean, it's a good talking point, but essentially, we're gonna have to go back to our local taxpayers and say, we need more. Every year, we need more. We know that you're sending a lot of money to the state, but we need you to do more. And so,
Yeah, so I have a whole slide on
okay.
tax relief. Where am I at? Sorry, I got lots of things here. Just real quick, let's talk about the S&P Credit Rating Agency. So Standard & Poor's had a U.S. local government credit brief that they released in March 28 at 2025. And it talks about the potential for property tax reform. Property taxes are foundational credit strength for Ohio schools, given their relative stability as a source of revenue. In response to the double-digit appraisal increases, state legislators are exploring property tax reform legislation, potentially leading to reduced property revenues for school districts, which could materially affect our view of school districts' institutional framework and revenue and expenditure balance. What does that mean? When we borrow money through bonds, when we issue bonds, the voters approve it. We also had a COPS issue, certificates of participation that was used with current revenues out of our PI funds. We go in front of a rating agency, and they assign a rating to that issue. And the reason why school districts and local governments across the state in general fare pretty well with their ratings is because of our property tax system in Ohio. And I shared this in the House Finance Committee. There is guidance on if you have, what your rating might be, how your rating is calculated based on a 30% fund balance, below a 30% or above a 30% fund balance. Moody's had some guidance on that. And there's a scorecard that they keep for all of the entities that they look at. But overall, the reason our bonds always look favorable to investors is because our property tax system is so reliable in Ohio. And essentially what this is saying, and what I told the House Finance Committee, if they start passing laws that significantly reduce voted levies from the will of the people that have voted at the ballot box for these revenues and those levies for their school system, if the legislature can do that, then it is going to just upend how credit rating agencies view property taxes in Ohio. And so, and this is essentially what I appreciated that S&P put this out in late March.
So Nicole, the bottom line for that is it costs us, the taxpayer, more money to
It would
borrow,
cost- It
right?
would cost us
That's-
more.
that's the
That
bottom
keeps our
line.
interest rates low
Keeps our
when we
interest,
borrow
our
funds.
interest will go up based on
It
what we can
also-
borrow.
Yeah, because that will view who is interested in even investing in your bonds that you have based on whatever rating they give you. The other thing I want to have out there just as a resource for folks that are interested is the Ohio Association of School Business Officials, and that is an association that I belong to. It's made up of treasurers, business managers, food service, EMS, all of those folks that work in schools across Ohio. Put together a cash balances white paper, sort of a long document, but it has lots of information out there about why a lot of schools have cash balances. It was originally authored in 2018. It was updated in 2022, and it talks about best practices and different things, different legal requirements and all of that. Also has some sample policies for districts that don't have cash balance policies. And we actually use this with our district finance committee to develop our local board policy here, if you remember back a little bit ago. And we do have that local board policy at 6210.01, like I said, developed with the district finance committee, and it requires 90 days unreserved cash for each year of the 5-year forecast period. So that's looking at what are our total expenditures in terms of days. So if we close the doors today, how many, if we, not close the doors, if we stopped receiving revenue today, how many days could we keep the doors open? And that's 90 days, what we look at for that unreserved cash. And that's through all 5 years of the forecast period. If we don't meet that mark, which currently we do not, that triggers action by the board superintendent and treasurer if that benchmark's not met. And that's a lot of the reason why we came back and had to start making reductions immediately after we failed the levy, because we were below that 90-day requirement. And then budget reserve, so also part of that cash balance policy, it's cash balance and reserve is actually the name of the policy. We implemented a budget stabilization account. So this is essentially only reflected on the 5-year forecast. We don't account for it separately, but it's 5% of the preceding year's revenues. And it just reduces the unencumbered balance in the fiscal year. It doesn't accumulate year over year or anything like that. It's just for that fiscal year to look at. And then our, we do not have this, but this is something I want to talk to the board about. So under Ohio Law 5705.13B, it's known as a terminations benefits fund. This is a special fund. So when we call something a special fund, that's where we're restricting the revenue, the resources are restricted for a specific purpose. So it's accounted for in a separate fund from the general operating fund. And so some school districts have this, and this is something I think we might want to think about looking at. We can create this fund to accumulate cash to pay for accumulated leave payouts, such as severance or vacation payouts, or an irregular pay cycle. So we are a district that's on 26 pays. So every 10 to 11 years, depending on the calendar, we have a 27th pay in the fiscal year. We had a 27th pay in our fiscal year 2023 forecast, and so that inflated the forecast in that year. And then, you know, it would have been reduced in the next year. But that's sometimes we have to spread out pays over 27 pays instead of 26 to capture that pay cycle in the calendar movement. And so this is not included in the 5-year forecast, and the fund can be rescinded if needed at any time. Like I mentioned, in salaries, we have about $5.6 million every pay cycle. And then for our severance, we paid about $1.2 million out in severance last year. So we're about $1 million year over year in severance payments. All of our employee groups have severance policies, and just a reminder that severance is required under state law also.
If we created this fund, would that allow us to move some money in there and not have it taken back from us?
So that would be, so I think this would be part of just prudent planning. If we are worried about cash flows in the future to be able to meet those obligations that we have, this would allow us to set aside some funds. Essentially, if you think about this, so this clawback only under the House's proposal would only apply to traditional public schools. Wouldn't apply to private or charter schools. It wouldn't apply to counties, cities, villages, townships, just traditional public schools. And so I think it would be helpful as we think about other entities. They have the ability to appropriate things separately, and that sort of like ties it up from what's available for their resources. And so, and when you think about our general operating fund, we're not taking into account, and there's actually a Representative Troy out of the Dayton area that talks about this a lot, and I don't know that I agree with like starting to look at GAAP for the 5-year forecast, because I feel like that could get complicated super fast. But when we look at that cash balance, that doesn't take into account any long-term contracts we've signed, you know, our copier leases that we have, our negotiated agreements. I mean, we have lots of long-term contracts, our technology purchases, like all of those things. If that's not, that doesn't even take into account our encumbrances, the purchase orders that we have outstanding at June 30th that it's just a matter of timing. Those invoices haven't been paid yet, but they will be paid in July and August and September, well into, like, right into the next fiscal year. You know what I mean? So thinking about a special fund, that it would allow us to sort of account for that we have a future liability that we have already, and then this would help make sure that we could meet that future liability. Does that make sense?
You just said it, but I want to repeat that the 30%, what we're calling a clawback, that take back, it would not apply to private schools, non-public charter schools, any other government entity. It's only traditional public schools.
Yes.
I just want to underline that.
They are, the private schools and the non-traditional public schools also got a nice substantial increase in their funding too.
Yes, they did. Much more than the traditional public schools.
Okay, and yet still, when you look at the amount of funding per student, right? Like what our schools receive, I don't know if you have the numbers off the top of your head, say, versus what a high school student can get in terms of a voucher, what they're about 8,000.
Yeah, so we receive
Potentially.
on average about $3,000 per
Mhm.
student. The voucher, the choice vouchers are $166 for a K-8 student
Mhm.
and $8,408 for a 9/12 student.
Yep, so significantly higher.
Yes.
And they would not be subject to the clawback. I realize I'm just underlining things right now.
They're not
That's
subject
what
to the
I'm-
clawback. They're also not subject to a lot of things that,
Yes.
Yeah.
and, we're in this space, just real quick. I keep hearing that what's a better deal for the taxpayer, because our average expenditure per pupil is a little over $12,000, but the state's only funding us for 3,000 of that. So just hold that tight, right? But when we talk about the state's funding Ed Choice 6,000 or 8,400, we're still providing transportation or making a payment in lieu of transportation. We're still providing some special education services. Those students aren't included in the denominator for our expenditure per pupil. So that is not an apples to apples comparison, and nor is it accurate in any way, shape, or form.
Meaning, they're not included in the denominator, meaning when you take what we spend and divide it by the number of students, we're not including those students
We're not,
who we're spending money on in that
right.
calculation.
Even though we have
Even though-
substantial costs for
Mhm.
those, so.
By law.
By law.
By law.
There was a new requirement with the John Peterson Autism Scholarships within the last year and a half, I think, that required us to provide transportation, because previously it was part of the law that they basically give up FAPE if they do that. And that added $1.8 million to our annual budget. But those students are not in our denominator when you talk about what is our expenditure per pupil. And, and I continue to tell people that tell me that schools don't have a revenue problem, they have a spending problem, that our only spending problem is that the state continues to put additional requirements on us that aren't funded.
Really quickly, Ms. Marshall, to further underscore, right? 90% of Ohio's students are public educated, right? So 90% of students in Ohio are being penalized. 90% of students will have a harder time competing for college or competing in the job world because their parents chose public education and were potentially getting ripped away all of everything down to the bare minute.
That would appear to be the plan, yeah.
And just reiterating again, so a child goes to a private school, they're eligible for a voucher. Voucher, let's say for high school, is around the $8,000 mark, like you said. The private school, however, could charge whatever they want. So they could charge $28,000 for a year of tuition. The $8,000 would go towards that, and the parents are picking up, $20,000 or whatnot. So those dollars, though, can be spent however they see fit at that private school. Meanwhile, child goes to private school requires disability services, speech therapy, transportation, all of that, we pick up the tab on that. So that private school can charge whatever they want, use it however they want, but we still have to provide additional services. Got it?
We also enjoy 6 months out of the year with our state auditor friends that you saw at the last board meeting we had. We were excited to get another Clean Audit Award. The private schools do not go through those audits.
And Ms. Marshall, as was just stated, 90% of students attend public school and about 10% private or charter. What is the state budget increase, public versus charter, percentage-wise or dollar-wise? I seem to remember some numbers like 222 or so for the totality of state of public school, and only in 500, was that
Over
right?
500 million.
And 500 million to charter schools. So 90% of students are getting 222 million, 10% are getting 500 million. Is that correct?
Approximately, yes.
And to be clear with these private schools, it seems like the state legislature is trying to make public schools into entities that provide subpar education so that people do put their kids in private schools. But there are not enough private schools in Ohio, period, anywhere, to accommodate the 90% that are going to public schools currently. So this is a flawed plan.
The other thing I'll say is that we obviously educate any student that, we are required to educate any student that resides within our school boundaries. We do not have an application process. Obviously, private schools and charter schools are able to have an application process, and they can choose to allow or not allow a student in for whatever reason. I think at the end of the day, when we think about the legislators, I think that there's a lot of good men and women at the State House that support public education on both sides of the aisle. I don't think this is a partisan issue. And I think that, we have to educate them, because we have to remember that people are elected to be lawmakers, and they have their areas of expertise, and they have their committees that they serve on. But I think not everybody understands, well, I know not everybody understands how property taxes work or how school funding works in the state of Ohio. So I think it's our job to engage and educate them. I think it's really helpful when they're hearing from our local community. When people show up in numbers, whether it's calling, emailing, showing up, testifying, whatever it is, they take notice of it, and they realize, oh wait, this might not be my area of expertise, but I need to pay attention to this because my community is really up in a roar about this. And so I think that's, at the end of the day, I think we all just want kids to be educated for the betterment of society and our future. And I think that the majority of people, that when they understand how the system works and what these things look like, they support something that's more balanced and makes more sense in terms of who attends schools where and what that looks like. So what we have right now to work with is the House's proposal, and so we need to keep engaging our senators. We have spent time with Andy Brenner, who chairs the Finance Committee, and starting hearings this week. Finance Committee? Education Committee, thank you. Chairs the Education Committee and is having hearings starting this week. And so we just need to keep engaging, and it's helpful when constituents do the same.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I think for me, as we're taking all of this in, because it is a lot to take in, right, something that should alarm everyone, and is certainly alarming me, is what the everyday consequences, what that life is going to look like for our kids, especially when we get to 26, 27 fiscal years, and we see the cash reserves sort of dwindling, and then we're operating in the negatives. Obviously, I wasn't around at that time, but I know that this district was really impacted when we had to gut our middle school programs. And now with the way things are heading, we're looking at that K through 12 critical programming being impacted. And that'll take us years to get back to where where we need to be. And so I guess my question is, can you talk a little bit more about that everyday impact to our kids? I know you shared if you were getting busing before, it's not gonna look the same right now. We won't be able to provide the core programming that we may be offering to students right now, especially those vulnerable students. But could you just talk a little bit more about what every day would look like for families?
Yeah, I mean, it would hard to, I think I'm gonna turn it over to Mr. Reeves, because, I mean, he lived through
Yeah.
some of this stuff.
You're absolutely right when you talk about the middle school programming back in 11 and 12. And I think that's where we work very much in cooperation with the Treasurer's Office to say, what's the mark we're trying to get to? Back then, it was around 20 million, prior to us passing the emergency levy in March. But we started to say, okay, what's the least impact to kids? And just kept tiering that in until we hit that mark. We tried to preserve then as much programming as we could for high school. We elevated extracurricular fees significantly. We went from maybe less than $100 to $300 per sport, no cap, no limits for families, but in able to preserve things like our AP programming, our International Baccalaureate programming, our extracurricular programming. We disproportionately impacted places where we didn't have requirements like middle school. And for those of you who may have lived through that either as a parent, it reduced so many courses at the middle school level that we had to take a period away. We had an 8-period day. We had to go down to 7 periods. And not only did we go down to 7 periods, we had students taking 1-2 study halls every single day within that 7 periods because we didn't have the coursework. And recovering from that took almost a decade to recover from that to have a very robust programming we have now. So what the everyday experience would really be Nicole and her team saying, here's the impact and here's the mark we need to get to, whatever that millions of dollars is. And then we kind of start on the periphery of what costs us that impacts minimal students, as opposed to eliminating a program that right off the bat that impacts thousands of our students. Okay, dozens of our students, how much does that cost? And keep coming into until you start getting to what you have to have, what you're required to have, which is really based more in high school than any other places. And so the experience is less choices, greater cost, which when you look at the economic diversity of our school district, all the way from wealthy to economically disadvantaged, it disproportionately affects our economically disadvantaged students who would not have access to some of that extracurricular program, which then in turn, the ripple effect is we wouldn't need as much extracurricular programming because we wouldn't have as many students to participate in it. Things that may be a luxury that we don't have to have, like International Baccalaureate programming. We don't have to have that, but it is a wonderful academic program that our community thrives on. Our advanced placement, the breadth of our advanced placement courses. When you look at College Credit Plus, we have over a dozen College Credit Plus courses taught on campus by our students. That opens the door up to college to hundreds of students that would have never accessed it. When we have neighboring districts that don't offer any in-house, and all of their students have to go outside. Well, we see that as something that disproportionately impacts kids who can't do that in our district. Things like that we don't have to have, that not only would cut programming, but potentially save some dollars because we also have to fund the college tuition. We know that the number of kids who would go out to college would reduce greatly. Extracurricular programming, we would look at the cost and really say it will either greatly reduce in choices or about the same time that we were in economically dire straits, so was Southwestern City, who eliminated extra programs for an entire year and saved them several $1 million, and it devastated their community. And they really have they still have never recovered to where they were prior to doing that. And so looking at all of those things, the daily experience of a kid would be vastly different than the wonderful experiences that everyone has built for them over the last 10 to 15 years.
I just think about class sizes too, like, how much differentiated learning our teachers have to do as it is, and like, what that would look like if instead of 25 to 1, we're looking at 30 or 32 or 33 to 1, and like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's difficult. I mean, I was in the classroom for a decade.
Especially with
difficult.
all of the needs that our students have now.
Yes.
And Mr. Reeves, maybe the impact on the collective, things like retention of
Mhm.
students and absenteeism and on-time graduation and
Yeah.
mental health challenges that
Yeah.
are going to probably expound
Yes.
by the idea that the kid can no longer do music or theater or art, or College Credit Plus is not an option for someone who thought that they had a shot at college.
Yes.
The ripple effects go far beyond, I think, just the idea of eliminating down to core. It's what's going to impact everyone emotionally and mentally.
Yes, you are
We would
correct in
also
that.
lose a lot of really great staff in the process too,
Yes.
I think.
Yes. And we did then.
Yeah.
In 2011, we did then.
And I think as adults making decisions, sometimes it's easy to say, it's not easy to say, but sometimes we say things like, well, it might go away for a year or 2 years, and then there's this hope maybe something will come back. But I just want to remind people that for that kid, it's it, right? They got one shot at grades K through 12, we'll say, and that experience is gone for them forever. So we take that very seriously.
And that experience is gone, and because you never were exposed to it,
Yep.
whether it was music, whether it was a college course, you never returned to it. When I was a young lad, a little decade or two ago, and I'm a Columbus Public graduate, Columbus went through significant financial, and when I entered middle school, Columbus eliminated all middle school sports to preserve its high school sports. And there were several of my friends and colleagues who never re-entered, and some of them maybe have made decisions a little left of center because they didn't have that positive influence in their life. And so you're absolutely right, that ripple effect isn't temporary. For some, it's permanent.
So I think that, I appreciate you elaborating more on that. I think that also goes not just to like the child, right, ripple effect, but it also goes to our societal ripple effects, right? You think about, unfortunately, some kids might find themselves in incarceration and those challenges, or even in further poverty. And so the cost benefit, right, just really investing in our public schools could really save us a lot of money in the long run and really set our students up for great success. It's just really heartbreaking that we're here.
So I think our job is to try to plan as best we can with what we have available to us and help educate our legislators, but I do have a few more slides I want to go through. That's okay. So another thing that we have under law, which is 570513C, the Termination Benefits Fund was B, is the Capital Projects Fund. So this is what we did with the $30 million that the board set aside. We can accumulate resources for the acquisition, construction, or improvement of fixed assets, including motor vehicles, not included in the 5-year forecast, must be obligated, so enter into contracts within the 10 years, and the fund may be rescinded if needed. So we had a whole plan prior to November. We transferred $30 million to fund the capital projects, create and fund the capital projects fund. When the ballot issue failed, we rescinded the fund. That money moved back, and so that's where we are now. And Carrie, I don't know if you want to talk about, we've had a lot of conversations about, what was on the ballot is sort of just the tip of the iceberg of all of the things that we need for facilities. When we were on the ballot in 2019, we were looking at the first year of a 10-year facilities, the first 5 years of a 10-year facilities master plan. And so we looked at that second 5 years, and it was way bigger of a price tag than what we anticipated. So Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. If everybody remembers, the facility master plan was a 10-year plan, and it was set to address our buildings that were age 55 or older, or as they became 55 or older. And as we finished that first phase of the facility master plan, we started looking at the second phase. And it initially had Charrington, Huber Ridge, Mark Twain, Robert Frost, Blendon, Walnut Springs, and Westerville North in there. They were the horizon of that second phase of the facility master plan. Well, with the inflationary costs of construction post-COVID, and we're all experiencing these same rates, we realized that ask on our community was going to be really great. So we did a lot of work with the strategic plan committee, through board work sessions, our administrator meetings as well, talking about changing or amending that second cycle of the facility master plan just to focus on the 4 buildings that we knew they were all built, constructed, opened in the 1960s, the original parts of the building. So that focus that we actually went on the ballot with was Charrington, Huber Ridge, Blendon, and Walnut Springs. So we also recognize that we have other district facility needs, including our theaters, and all 3 of our high schools have some projects that could help expand not only the use to our students in our theater programs, but also general use for choir concert, orchestra concerts, meetings. Our community uses our buildings a lot, and it's time to give them some attention, so we've carved out some money for that. Our marching bands and outdoor facilities as well. Luckily, since the programming had kind of been decimated as part of that levy failure in middle school, you see that come up with your high schools. And when you don't focus and put the attention in that programming at a young age, it doesn't carry through to the high schools. We're seeing that rebound with Becca Yanni's work that she's done, really exposing kids to musical instruments early on. So we're going to need facilities that can help support that interest. We also looked at our preschool here at the Early Learning Center. We know that we currently have 4 sections of our preschool being held at Point View Elementary School because we've outgrown the facilities downstairs. There was also an opportunity to address some other needs that we have as a function in this district, which was our enrollment center location, along with this board training room, which we know, especially recently, that when you put a lot of people in here, the design of the space can be a little complicated to the function of the meeting.
And just the accessibility of this space as well.
And the accessibility of the space. This building was a purchased building as it existed, so we do have an aging elevator in this building, and we've run into that issue over the last couple of years. So we'd carved out all of those along with more of a want than a need in our athletic facilities, and looking at some outdoor space for them as well that included restrooms, expansions at a couple of our high schools, because all 3 of our high school exterior facilities are very different. So all of that was part of those initial projects that we talked about. So some of those were wants, as you have conversations, and some of those are needs. I mean, we have buildings that are exceeding 55 years at this point, and it's time to give them some attention, and we don't have the funding to do it. Our team, our facilities team, does a really great job of maintaining our buildings in terms of flooring and lighting and fixtures as the needs come up. But every year you tack a year on as homeowners, I think we all know, at some point you have to invest in them.
In 2019, a bus cost $85,894.
The gen ed bus did.
General education bus. The resolution passed in November was $140,872 for a school bus. Inflation is real.
Our My Van cost, the actual cost of the purchase of the My Van themselves has also doubled in cost in that same time frame.
It's crazy. So we share with the legislators, we have hundreds of millions of dollars in facilities needs. Nobody is carrying a fund balance because they don't have anything to do with the money. We have lots of things we could do with the money. It's just keeping us being able to meet our contractual obligations and keep the doors open right now. We already have a deficit year over year of over $20 million, and the state would be adding to that significantly with this. Were you going to say something, Jim?
Yeah, I think it's the difference between recurring costs and one-time expenditures. And so we have lots and lots of one-time expenditures to use it for, but we don't have the adequate revenues to cover the recurring costs. So
Right.
can't emphasize that enough. I think we've tried to really tell our legislators that. I'm not sure they're hearing that.
Yeah, I don't know if they're hearing that. You know, I use the example of if you have a savings account, like you wouldn't go out and take a mortgage and pay your mortgage payment based on what you have on your savings. You might take your portion of it and pay a down payment on something, right? But that's a one-time expense. You wouldn't plan to meet your monthly mortgage payment with what you've saved up in your savings.
And along this 10-year horizon that is for obligated funds, when we transferred that 30 million back, where was that along that timeline?
What do you mean? Oh,
Uh,
no, we had just transferred it
Okay.
prior to November
Okay,
to put it, so that way when we messaged, so we got some recent auditor's guidance on levies and what kinds of things we could message and things like that. In order for us to message that the board was setting aside $30 million, we had to have the board already have that moved to be able to do that.
thank you.
If I had it to do over again, I would have waited till after November. And just have the board pass a resolution saying that they would transfer it in the future. Lesson learned. Lesson learned on my part. So this is what I was talking about earlier. So this is the Joint Committee on Property Tax Review and Reform. And I'm gonna pass down a handout here. This was, I don't know how many pages this report was, but it was kind of long. You guys, you already have that, don't you, Scott? I shared this with our Finance Committee the other night. They met all of calendar year 2024. Their hearings are actually still on the Ohio channel if anyone's interested in going back and watching it. But there was, I mean, I was really impressed with the committee, well, some of the members on the committee, so this is House members and Senate members that met together. They had experts come in, not just school officials, but like from all over the state come in and talk about property taxes and really learn about how property taxes work and all of the different nuancy things. Lots of conversations about tax abatements, which I really appreciated, when we also talk about why we need healthy reserves to be able to weather things. You know, the Board of Revision clawbacks that we see, the abatements, we have some abatements that are being approved late at the county, which means we may have already received tax revenue and we shouldn't have because it was exempt, and then it gets clawed back later. That's happening all around the state. And so, anyway, I appreciated the engagement of the committee, of this committee. They put a lot of hard work into learning about Ohio's property tax system, how it works and all of those things. And they came up with 2.5 pages of recommendations. And nowhere in there is clawing back fund balances over 30% for public school districts. So they had a whole committee of their legislative colleagues that met and discussed this issue. And there was a myriad of recommendations. And I think that the state knows. We've had state lawmakers acknowledge that they've done a really good job of screwing the local property taxes system up, and that they have a lot of work to do to fix it, and so they need to do the work to fix it and not do this, whatever this is, with the clawback. That's my opinion.
Do we have any idea where the idea for the clawback came from? If it's not from here, and it
No.
wasn't in the kind of original, it wasn't in the governor's plan.
Everyone said it came out of the blue. I don't think anybody really
Okay.
knows. No. So, this is a heat map from the Ohio Department of Education and Workforce, a presentation that I saw. And the orange, this is the change in the state share percentage from 2024 to 2025. And if you're wondering where we are, we're right there. We lost 7% in our state share from 24 to 25. That is a significant drop, but you can see most districts, except for that little green area up in the top there, saw a decrease in their state share. The state continues to shift education, the cost of education for traditional public schools down to our local property owners. And it's not just in Westerville, they're doing it all across the state. And when we talk about total state funding for traditional public schools, we had a lot of conversations about the Giroff decision. Can anybody guess what the state's share was during the Giroff decision? Statewide, all schools. Anyone? Yep.
Yeah.
42%. Does anybody know what it is today? It's 38%. Under the governor's proposal, that would have dropped to 32%. So we're still a long way where we need to be. They didn't meet their constitutional responsibility back in '97 when DeRoff was first heard, settled, I don't know, whatever you call it. And, you know, we're still below that, so. All right, that's my presentation. Don't forget who your legislators are. These are the state leaders. This guy here, we need to spend a lot of time with, I think, over the next few weeks. Rob McCauley, he's the one that said he believes that the state legislature has done a really good job screwing the local property taxes up. He was quoted in, was it Fox 8? Was it Fox 8? Yeah. That was in our news and announcements, if you missed that story. We quoted him.
So one of his school districts actually is on the ballot. They're trying to pass a levy in May, and then they're transferring to educate their public
Yeah.
about how much money they're gonna lose because of this state budget. So they're very much impacted as well. I've been
Yeah, I
talking
think-
to different districts across
I
the
think
state.
everyone is.
Mhm.
Sorry, where is Senate District 1 exactly? What area? So we know.
It was Van Wert, Finley.
Yeah, I've looked at so many of
Defiance.
them, I can't.
Yeah.
Not that little
Defiance
green
from-
area on the map.
No, that was and then Hudson's area.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's the name.
And then just their contact information. And then our committees, so the, Education Committee, that's what's having hearings now. I think the Senate Finance Committee has already heard from some of the state departments on the, appropriations, so. Because it's not just education, right? It's everything that the state needs to operate, so. Okay. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you all wanted to cover? I know that was a very long conversation.
The only thing I would add is, or could you share where on the district website folks can go to learn more on how they can advocate?
They can go to our website. Yeah, if they go to our website, there is a button. I feel like I'm really close. Huh? Yeah, there's a button on the homepage, and I think, is the photo, can you click on the photo? To learn more on the photo? Yeah.
I might also add to, for our community, right, we have been doing a lot of educating our legislators, and they've told us that they're hearing a lot from us, and they appreciate that. But I think we also need to not just tag 5 people in our district, but 5 people across the state, right? Because it's those rural areas that we first saw, if we remember, Speaker Huffman said early on in the year that he really wanted to dismantle public education. But a lot of the rural communities started to speak up. We started to see him walk back some of his words. So we need to really be reaching out to our family, our friends across the state, and asking them to step up too, and to contact their legislators, and to contact their school districts to find out how they're gonna be impacted as well.
Yeah, I think it's ironic too, because there's a lot of conversation about closing traditional public schools if they have less than 1,000 students in enrollment. That's a lot of schools. I know. And then continuing to incentivize private and charter schools to open up, and there's no, that are much smaller than, yeah. It's just bizarre to me. I should turn my microphone off now.
So I think one of our goals was just to kind of open up some dialogue around what are some options we have with that cash balance. And again, from a standpoint of you know, there are different ways to approach that. We have needs that we currently just take right out of the general fund. Those needs are there, whether that money's in the general fund or if it's in one of these other statutorily allowed accounts. And so that would be something for the board to start thinking about. We're happy to answer any questions or have any more dialogue around that.
I think we'd need to start making some decisions around that, depending on what comes out of the Senate, in the future, so.
Yeah, so we just wanted you to start thinking that. We wanted to put it on our community's radar, that these are some options because, you know, the things that Nicole brought up, those are all needs that we have. A lot of times we just take that right out of the general fund. That wouldn't be an option, so we maybe need to look at a different way of accounting for it. Same needs that we have, same
Yeah,
expenses that we
that didn't
anticipate
change.
having, but how do we account for that?
So I have a question on that. So the budget needs to be signed into law by July 1st. So if this stays the same, or generally the same, do we have time to react to that before, I'm guessing it's August timeframe you said, that we would have to be sitting down with the commissioners or whatever?
We'd need to make any decisions before June 30th,
Okay,
so.
Okay.
Yeah. So we will come back with the forecast updated in May. And then maybe in June, we might want to consider another work session to discuss what that might look
okay.
like.
Thanks for the timeframe.
Mhm.
And Ms. Marshall or Ms. Hamburg, are there other Ohio Revised Code language or that maybe we can place other funds into that we don't know about or that weren't brought up tonight that maybe
So-
for purposes of, running our school district? I'm sure you would have brought them up if there was, but I'm just.
Well, so you can transfer funds from your general operating fund to any fund, any other fund. It's the ability to be able to transfer it back if you should not need it in those other funds. So the ones that I shared with you tonight, those are able to be rescinded and moved back if needed in the future. But we could also transfer into, like, our permanent improvement fund. We have a permanent improvement levy that collects about $9 million a year. It's not enough to meet all the things that the district needs. And
But
I
that
know
capital fund that you had would be similar purpose,
Yes.
right?
it would be a
So,
similar purpose.
Really,
yeah.
the two
So
she brought you tonight are our two main areas. So one would be to pay personnel-related costs like severance or that extra pay, and then the other one would be capital needs. And so when you think about both of their areas, really outside of personnel costs, we can buy those things out of the capital money. So when we talk about computers for students, when we talk about buses and vans, when we talk about new math materials that we need, all those things, because of the life cycle of them, we could purchase out of there. So I think, and I'll defer to Nicole, but I think not getting too many different accounts, but like what are a couple key ones that
Right.
cover the majority of the types of expenses we'll have, I think would help us, first of all, keep it simpler for our community and for us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great question.
So it's a ton of information, and a lot of this is helping people understand the why, right? Like, why does this matter? Why is it relevant to us? If we were to sort of identify, when somebody makes a phone call to a legislator or something, keeping it relatively short, maybe 2 bullet points, right? It feels like what we're calling the clawback, right? Which is really taking money the district has planned with and essentially taking it away. That seems like one. And then funding the Fair School Funding Plan seems like, is that, like, if we had to sort of say, what are the top couple of bullet points, if you've got a 15-second message you're going to leave?
If I have to leave a 15-second message, I'm saying to please keep the Fair School Funding Plan, update the cost inputs to reflect inflation, stabilize the state share, and eliminate the clawback provision.
Okay. So most people might get half as many in as you.
But that's my 15-second
Awesome.
conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
2 points would be fair for
Yes. Yes.
Thanks.
I think if you just say, update the Fair School Funding Plan, they're gonna know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because they've gotten enough information from us by what we mean by updating the Fair School Funding Plan.
Yep, Okay.
And just remember, the House's version essentially sets the fair school funding plan aside.
Yep.
So keeping the fair school funding
Yep.
plan is also important.
Thanks.
The work went into that.
Bipartisan work. Yep.
Is there anything else that would be helpful for the board as we're in this kind of in-between phase that we can be working on to help you as we move forward? Or any other questions that you have for any of the team?
Yeah, I mean, I think in some ways, right, there's just so much information that, excuse me, part of what I want to do is just make sure it's clear to people. Sorry. In their 15 seconds, what our highest priorities are.
Anybody else have any other questions? I think we'll likely have other questions as things continue to proceed, and I think as we start to see the Senate discuss this and where this is heading, we'll want to get information out to our public about the changes and what that means. And for those that may not follow the legislative process as much as some of us do, it moves pretty fast and things can change really rapidly. And so a good, I know we'll do our best to keep people updated, but also a good resource might be just to check back every once in a while on the school's website just to see if there's updated information.
Policy Matters Ohio also does a really great
Yeah.
job of keeping up real time with this. So if anybody is wanting more of that real time information about what's happening, I would check out Policy Matters Ohio's website.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you all so much for all that information. I know a lot of work has gone into educating our community over the past couple of months too, so I really appreciate everything that you guys have been doing for our students and our kids. Okay, so board comments. Who'd like to go first? If anybody.
I want to say thank you to everyone's hard work, first of all, because this is a lot, right? And it continues to be a lot, so I really appreciate all hands on deck and everyone continually keeping the board updated. It's super helpful, and by extension, our community. I just wanted to say that in this era that we live in, oftentimes it seems like I can't do much, right? Like I can't do a lot about the trade war. I can't do a lot about the price of eggs or gasoline or immigration, and I really can't. Most of us can't. And this is one thing that everyone can do locally that's going to make a huge difference for the district and by extension for the state. That one phone call, that one email, and convincing a few other people to make one phone call and one email, that has an impact in a way that, writing your legislator and saying, hey, I disagree with immigration policy right now, this is a lot more tangible and actionable to most people. So I just want to encourage you to do that. I also want to mention that we're under a really tight deadline. As was mentioned, the Senate's probably going to move through this in about 2 weeks. And if these things are still in there in 2 weeks, we're going to lose a lot of our leverage to get them pulled out before this goes into the different committees and into what they call reconciliation. So your time for action is now. It's not like, I'll just wait till it gets close to the governor's desk. It's going to be really difficult. But as was mentioned by one of my colleagues, keep hitting the governor up. He does have the line item veto. So in the event that some of the stuff still sticks, tell him, hey, strike out the fair school funding and strike out the 30%, or don't strike out, keep fair school funding and strike out the 30%, because that is sort of our last shot. But work quickly if you can, because there's not a lot left. And thank you.
I'll just also reiterate, thank you, Nicole, for all of your time putting this together, and to the superintendent and to all of the administrators who have helped to put all this information together and try to bring it down to fifth grade level for those of us who are not mired in it every single day. This has been very helpful. Yeah, and I think like Dwight mentioned, there's so much going on right now that it can be very overwhelming and can be really easy to just want to stick your head in the sand somewhere and hope that it all goes away. But that's not going to help us educate our children. And these small things that we can do, a phone call, an email, telling your friends about it, can really make the difference. It seems like a lot of times the legislators aren't listening, but believe me, they're tallying up the number of phone calls they're getting, the number of emails they're getting, and what they're for. They are keeping tallies on these, so very important. So thank you to the public for, in advance, doing their part.
I want to echo all of that, but I also want to thank our state legislators that have been conducting tours alongside Superintendent Angie and all of our administrators and a few board members here. I mean, having them come, take time out of their day to tour and really see what it is that we're talking about is so important. So join us in thanking them as well. At the end of the day, we need their help as well. So thank you.
Yeah, in addition to that, I think that when you call a legislator, write an email, your personal stories matter, right? Here's why this program matters to my family so much, and it's so important that we keep it for kids like my kid. And or even, this is where I appeal to our recent grads too, right? What is it that really impacted you that might be at risk here, and how your life has set off on a trajectory that you're proud of because of something that happened in school. So again, they get a lot of tallies, but I think it always helps to personalize the story and it just underscores why it matters. Children are not just numbers. Children are people, and the experiences that they have in our schools change their lives. And we really mean that when we say that. So please share those stories too. And thank you to everybody who makes a call, and I think it's really important to thank the legislators for coming to see our schools, right? Because, you don't really know until you sit there and hear kids and they talk about their experience in an apprenticeship program like we talked about just last Friday with a legislator. So, thanks.
So I'll just echo that. I do want to underscore what Jen said. It's really important to share your why, because they take that to the floor. They talk to their colleagues. That's really what hits them in the heart. If you want to go one step further, look at why they care about the things that they care about and appeal to that. But that's an extra step, but really just tell your why and make the ask. And then I just want to say, we had some really great musicals this past weekend in high school and in middle school, and that's our why, right? That's our why. And the award season coming up, we're going to be at award nights, almost every night. We can fill them from here until graduation. And then graduation, it is unlike anything to stand up on the stage and to shake a kid's hand and see them graduate. I know, I'm so emotional. But anyways, thank you all for making the time in this special session to do this work. And with that, the board will meet in regular session on Monday, May 5th, 2025 at 6 p.m. at the Early Learning Center, 936 East Wind Drive, Westerville, Ohio, 43081. And with that, may I have a motion to enter into executive session for the purposes of preparing for, conducting, or reviewing negotiations with employees regarding their compensation or other terms and conditions of their employment, and for the purposes of discussing the employment and compensation of public employees.
So moved.
Second.
Will you take the vote, Ms. Marshall?
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mr. Heckelman?
Yes.
Mrs. Leban?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes. Thank you.
7:41.
And may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
We take the vote.
Mrs. Valentine?
Yes.
Mrs. Leban?
Yes.
Mrs. Altman?
Yes.
Mr. Heffelman?
Yes.
Mrs. Meyer?
Yes.